Hey everyone, welcome to our deep dive today.
Excited to be here.
We're going to be talking about something really interesting. It's about Islamic civilization
Oh, yeah.
and their contributions to science and exploration.
I think people will be pretty surprised by what we find.
Yeah, I think so too. You know, history often gets told from just one point of view,
Yeah.
a Eurocentric one, but there's a whole world of knowledge and discoveries out there that we often overlook. And that's what we are diving into today.
They love it.
So to guide us on this journey, we've got two sources.
Okay.
The first one is a study guide. It's called Islamic Contributions to Science and Exploration.
Catchy title.
Yeah. And we also have this YouTube video called Who Discovered the Americas?
Whoa.
Right? From a channel called Our History. It's AS Sunnis in Arabic.
Cool. Sounds like we've got some exciting material to work with.
Yeah. These sources really make you think. They bring up some really intriguing questions like, did Muslims actually discover America?
That's a big one.
Yeah. How did their faith shape their approach to science? What amazing things did they invent?
Can't wait to find out.
Me too.
Yeah.
So, the study guide starts off by addressing a common accusation.
Okay.
It says that Islamic civilization basically just preserved old knowledge.
Yeah.
Like they didn't actually create anything new, just kind of took care of old books. What do you think about that?
Well, preserving knowledge is important. I mean, think about it. We wouldn't have so much ancient wisdom if they hadn't done that.
True.
But to say Muslims didn't add anything new, that's just not true.
Yeah.
They made huge leaps forward in so many fields.
The YouTube video points out some of those fields, right?
Totally. It mentions algebra, chemistry, pharmacy, medicine, optics, and astronomy.
Whoa. That's a lot.
And those weren't just small contributions either. They were fundamental to those fields.
Gotcha. Can you give us like a specific example of one of those major contributions?
Sure. Let's take medicine, for example. The study guide talks about this book, The Comprehensive Book, a Medical Encyclopedia by Al-Razi. Okay. It was so comprehensive, so influential, that they actually used it at the medical school at the University of Paris.
No way.
Yeah. Imagine that. A book written by a Muslim scholar being used to teach European doctors centuries ago.
That's amazing. It really makes you question that idea that knowledge just flowed one way, you know, from Europe to the rest of the world.
Yeah, exactly. It shows how knowledge really flowed between cultures. But let's switch gears a bit.
Okay.
The YouTube video talks about something else really interesting, the experimental method, and how Muslim scientists really introduced that.
I find this so fascinating. How did this, like, change how science was done?
It was a total revolution. Before, a lot of science was based on just thinking about things, like philosophical debates.
Right.
But Muslim scholars, they brought in this new approach. They emphasized observation, experimentation, and data collection.
So they didn't just want to think about it, they wanted to actually see it.
Exactly. They wanted to see how things worked, test their ideas, and prove things with evidence.
Wow. So they were kind of like setting the stage for modern science as we know it.
Exactly. The video actually uses a great example to explain this. Imagine, like, ancient Greek philosophers, right?
All right.
Debating how many teeth a donkey has. They might argue for hours without ever, actually looking at a donkey.
Oh, that's funny.
But a Muslim scientist, they would insist on going out there, finding a donkey, and counting the teeth themselves.
Wow. Makes sense. It's all about basing knowledge on actually seeing what's real. But the study guide brings up this other really interesting question.
Okay.
It asks how Islamic faith influenced scientific inquiry. It makes you wonder, were faith and science seen as, like, opposing forces?
That's a great question, and it really gets to the heart of how Muslim scholars saw the world. For them, knowledge was a gift from God, a way to understand creation.
I see.
So pursuing knowledge, even scientific knowledge, was a form of worship. It was about getting closer to God by trying to understand his creation.
So it wasn't a conflict. Faith and science, they were actually connected.
Exactly. And the YouTube video emphasizes how this perspective led to a deep respect for knowledge and encouraged exploration, but always within, like, a moral framework.
Right. So it wasn't just knowledge for the sake of knowledge. It was about doing it with a sense of purpose and responsibility.
Exactly. And that leads us to a topic that's often pretty controversial. The discovery of the Americas. The YouTube video really dives into this with its title, Who Discovered the Americas?
Yeah, this is where things get really interesting. It challenges everything we've been taught in school. But before we jump in, I think it's important to remember that the word discovery is kind of problematic.
Yeah, good point.
The Americas were already inhabited by indigenous peoples for centuries. We need to respect their history and cultures.
Absolutely. We can't talk about this without acknowledging that.
Right. Okay, so with that said, what does the YouTube video suggest about Muslims possibly knowing about the Americas before Columbus?
So it presents some really interesting evidence. It points to historical writings that suggest that there may have been an awareness of lands across the Atlantic. In the Islamic tradition, long before Columbus, for example, it mentions al-Masudi's Meadows of Gold. It's a text from the 10th century, and it describes voyages and explorations that might have reached the Americas.
Interesting. And what about al-Biruni?
Yes, al-Biruni was a brilliant scholar from the 11th century. He actually hypothesized the existence of a large landmass to the west.
Really?
Yeah. He based this on his understanding that the Earth was round, and his calculations of how land was distributed. It shows a very sophisticated level of scientific thinking.
So even if we don't have, absolute proof of them physically arriving, there's evidence that Muslim scholars were thinking about and maybe even exploring lands beyond the Atlantic long before Columbus.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it really challenges that traditional narrative that gives all the credit to European explorers for, quote unquote, discovering the Americas.
It makes you wonder, what other stories are out there? What other perspectives have we been missing?
Right. It's so exciting. There's so much to explore.
I'm hooked.
Me too. But I think we should pick this up after a short break. We'll come back and keep going with this deep dive.
Sounds good to me.
We'll be right back.
See you soon.
We're back! Diving right back into this fascinating world, Islamic contributions to science and exploration.
Before the break, we were talking about something pretty big. The possibility of Muslims knowing about the Americas before Columbus.
Yeah, and that conversation, I think, it shows us something really important. We need to question the stories we've been told.
Totally. It's about, expanding our understanding of history, recognizing that it's not always so black and white.
Absolutely. History is full of twists and turns, different perspectives.
Okay, let's get back to it. The YouTube video, Who Discovered the Americas? It has some pretty compelling evidence suggesting Muslims may have known about lands across the Atlantic.
It does, and one key piece of evidence is the Piri-Reis map. It's an Ottoman map from the 16th century, and it shows the Americas with incredible accuracy.
I've seen images of that map. It's amazing. The level of detail is unbelievable, especially for something made so long ago.
It's a real head-scratcher. How did they map the coastlines so precisely? Some scholars even think it shows Antarctica, way before it was officially discovered.
Wow. It really makes you think. What other knowledge might be out there, just waiting for us to find it?
That's the exciting part, exploring these different narratives. It opens up a whole world of possibilities.
So let's say for a moment that Muslims did know about the Americas before Columbus. What does that tell us about their exploration, their seafaring skills?
It tells us they were way ahead of their time, more advanced than we often give them credit for.
The YouTube video touches on this too. It talks about how Muslim scholars and explorers made significant strides in navigation and shipbuilding.
Oh, absolutely. They were pioneers in developing tools like the astrolabe.
The astrolabe.
It let sailors figure out their latitude using the stars.
That's so clever. Such an elegant invention. It shows how much they understood astronomy and math.
Right. And they also developed some pretty sophisticated shipbuilding techniques. They built ships that could travel huge distances across vast oceans.
I remember the video mentioning something about them mastering the monsoon winds, which allowed them to create trade routes all across the Indian Ocean.
Exactly. They knew how to use the power of nature to their advantage.
So it wasn't just random exploration. They had a purpose. Connecting with different cultures, expanding their knowledge of the world.
And that drive led to this amazing flourishing of trade and cultural exchange between the Islamic world and other parts of the globe.
It's a good reminder that the world was much more connected than we sometimes imagine, especially back then.
Totally. And speaking of connections, let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about some of these specific scientific discoveries that came out of the Islamic world.
Yeah, their contributions there are often overlooked.
The study guide lists us a bunch of areas where Muslim scholars made real breakthroughs. We talk about medicine. But they also made huge strides in math, astronomy, optics, and engineering.
I've always been fascinated by their advancements in math. I remember learning about this scholar named Al-Khwarizmi. He's considered the father of algebra.
Oh, yeah. Al-Khwarizmi's work was fundamental. He introduced the idea of algorithms, step-by-step procedures for solving math problems.
Algorithms are everywhere these days. They're like the basis of computer programming, and so much more. It's wild to think those ideas came from a Muslim scholar centuries ago.
It really is. And his contributions weren't just theoretical. He came up with practical ways to solve real-world problems, like calculating inheritance or surveying land.
So his work had a direct impact on people's lives.
It did. And that's something we see a lot with scientific advancements from the Islamic world. They weren't just interested in knowledge for knowledge's sake. They wanted to use it to make society better.
Right. It shows their values, their perspective on the world.
Absolutely. And speaking of values, let's come back to that ethical framework we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. It's one of the things that really stands out to me about the Islamic world's approach to science and exploration.
The YouTube video stresses this idea that for Muslim scholars, knowledge was a gift from God, a gift meant to be used responsibly for the good of humanity.
It's a very different view from, like, the purely practical view of science we see today.
It is. For Muslim scholars, science wasn't just about making discoveries or inventing new gadgets. It was about understanding the world to fulfill a higher purpose.
It was about aligning their work with their faith and values.
Exactly. And that's something I think we can all learn from, no matter what our beliefs are.
Totally agree. In a world where technology is changing so fast, it's more important than ever to think about the ethical side of things.
We need to be asking ourselves not just what can we do, but what should we do?
And the ethical framework of the Islamic world offers some valuable guidance for navigating these complex questions.
It reminds us that knowledge is powerful, and we have to use it wisely, with compassion.
So as we explore the contributions of Islamic civilization, let's keep that ethical dimension in mind.
It's a crucial part of the story, and it can be a source of inspiration for us all.
We've talked about a lot in this section, but I feel like we've only scratched the surface.
There's always more to learn, and I'm excited to keep going on this journey with you.
Me too.
Yeah.
But for now, let's take another quick break.
We'll be back soon to wrap up this deep dive.
And we're back. This deep dive has been incredible.
It has. We've uncovered so much about the contributions of Islamic civilization to science and exploration.
One of the big takeaways for me is just how important it is to question what we think we know.
Yeah. We often look at history with a limited perspective, a Eurocentric one.
But as we've seen, the story of human progress, it's way more complicated than that, way more interconnected.
Absolutely. And the Islamic world, they played a huge part in that story.
Let's dig into that a bit more. One thing that really stood out to me from the sources is just how broad their knowledge was. The Muslim scholars, I mean.
Right. They weren't just focused on one thing. They were interested in everything. Math, astronomy, medicine, philosophy, you name it.
And they weren't just learning for the sake of learning.
No, they were driven by this desire to use their knowledge to actually make the world a better place.
The YouTube video talks about their advancements in engineering, for example.
Yeah. They made incredible progress in areas like irrigation, water management, and architecture.
Those intricate water clocks they built, I was fascinated by those.
Oh yeah, those are amazing examples of their ingenuity, harnessing the power of water to create these super precise timekeeping devices.
It's mind-blowing, the skill and precision involved in building those.
It shows just how deeply they understood mechanics and fluid dynamics.
And that understanding wasn't just theoretical, right? They put it into practice in ways that benefited society.
Exactly. Their engineering wasn't just impressive technically, it made a real difference in people's lives.
So we've covered their scientific advances, their ethical framework, their practical applications of knowledge. What else stands out to you as a key contribution of Islamic civilization?
I think their role in preserving and passing on knowledge is super important.
Right. They weren't just creating new knowledge, they were safeguarding the wisdom of older civilizations too.
The YouTube video mentions the House of Wisdom in Baghdad.
Oh, yeah?
It was this famous library, a center of learning. Scholars from all over the world went there.
I remember reading about that. That's where ancient Greek and Roman texts were translated into Arabic.
Exactly, and where Muslim scholars added their own original ideas to different fields of study.
So the House of Wisdom was this melting pot of ideas where knowledge from different cultures and traditions mixed and spread.
And that exchange of ideas across cultures, that was so important. It fueled the intellectual energy of the Islamic Golden Age.
It reminds us that progress often comes from collaboration, sharing knowledge.
Not from isolating ourselves or competing with each other.
And that's a lesson that's still relevant today.
Absolutely. In our increasingly interconnected world, it's more important than ever to break down those barriers, encourage dialogue between different cultures and viewpoints.
As we wrap up this deep dive, What are some key things we can take away from all this?
Well, I think the biggest one is remembering that history isn't just one story.
Right. It's not just about Western dominance and progress.
There's so many stories out there, so many perspectives.
And the story of Islamic civilization, it's one that often gets left out or pushed aside.
But as we've learned, it's full of amazing achievements, ingenuity, and this deep commitment to using knowledge for good.
So let's challenge ourselves to look beyond that dominant narrative, seek out different perspectives, and recognize how interconnected human history really is.
And let's be inspired by those who came before us, to use our own knowledge and skills to make the world a better place.
Well said. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. This has been a really eye-opening conversation.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks for having me on this deep dive. It's been fascinating.
I know our listeners are going to be eager to learn more, so if you want to dig deeper into this topic, check out the sources we mentioned: the study guide, Islamic Contributions to Science and Exploration, and the YouTube video, Who Discovered the Americas, from the Our History channel.
And don't forget to follow and subscribe to this channel so you don't miss our next episode, which will be, as always, super exciting and informative.